designer, and storyteller based in Amherstburg, Ontario. Her work explores history, culture, and you must be up there, lived experiences through exhibitions, books, and live talks. Jamie is a director with the Scottish Studies Foundation, which also presents the Scot of the Year Award. And she might tell you about that because that's hinged on Windsor. You're going to tell us about that later?
I could, yes.
Okay. So she was involved in nominating the Scot of the Year, and she'll tell you more about that, I'm sure. And is best known for Left at the Wellgate, an exhibition, forthcoming theatrical performance, and book that traces her great-grandmother's journey from Dundee to Canada in 1911. With deep family roots in Scotland and a lifelong interest with the work of Robert Burns, Jamie brings a conversational, plain-spoken approach to storytelling. And that's what we're going to hear. Ladies and gentlemen, Jamie Lees.
No. Just edit that part out.
Oh my goodness. I might need glasses.
Oh, thank you. I'm getting too old to get them.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank the Scottish Club of Windsor for hosting tonight, and to everyone who has carried the immortal memory before me. This tradition survives the same way most good ones do, because people keep showing up. And that tells you a lot about Robert Burns. Burns has something that most historical figures don't. People feel like they already know him, and he shows up in our kitchens, on bookshelves, in pubs, in songs, in lines people half remember and suddenly need. He wasn't trying to sound refined. He wrote for people like him. This past November 30th, on St. Andrew's Day, Scots, the language that Burns wrote in, was officially recognized as a language of Scotland alongside Gaelic and English. Gaelic has long been tied to the Highlands and Scots to the Lowlands, but for a long time, Scots sat in an awkward place. People spoke it freely at home, but it wasn't given much respect. It was treated kind of like bad English, the kind of language people learned at their granny's knee, then were told to speak properly when you're out. Burns didn't speak properly. He didn't tidy it up. He left it rough. And that's why people still ask if Burns needs translating. And honestly, even AI would struggle. Scots doesn't like being smoothed out. Burns wrote in a way that still expects a human on the other end. And Burns also knew how to push things. Some of his work was never meant for polite company. The Merry Muses of Caledonia is a collection of songs and poems full of sexual jokes and double meanings. Very much of the tavern than the drawing room. The book couldn't be openly published in Britain until 1965. But that didn't stop anyone, because people copied it by hand and passed it around because they wanted it, apparently quite badly. Burns was brilliant, but he was also inconvenient, hard to manage. He said things that people weren't always comfortable hearing. And he lasted because he sounded like real people. That carried over into his personal life as well. Let's just say it plainly. Burns was the bad boy of his day. Now here's where the story takes a turn. You might think a group of women, especially suffragettes, would have been offended by Burns' reputation with women. But the opposite was actually true. Burns was beloved. So in 1914, when two suffragettes were caught outside the Burns Cottage Museum with a homemade bomb, they weren't attacking Burns himself. They were aiming where it would hurt people who claimed to honor him. They were women trying to get the vote. And when no one listens, people make noise. Burns mattered to them. They were inspired by his poem called Scots Wha Hae. Burns wrote it in 1793, imagining Robert the Bruce speaking to his men before the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, calling on the memory of William Wallace and asking the men a simple question: are you going to stand for this or not? Scots Wha Hae, way Wallace bled. For generations, it worked as Scotland's unofficial national anthem, a poem about choosing liberty over obedience. So when one of the women was arrested, she didn't apologize. She stood up in court and shouted Burns, Scots Wha Hae! In other words, freedom. Or, translated into English by Mel Gibson in the historical controversial film Braveheart, freedom! These women weren't rejecting Burns. They were claiming him. And if people are still doing that with poetry, bombs, and courtroom shouting 230 years after your death, you've probably done something right. And that's why a Burns supper works. We don't keep Burns alive by analyzing him. We keep him alive by turning up and telling the stories again. And I'll finish with one of mine. I've lived with Robbie Burns my entire life. That's not a figure of speech. That's actually my brother's name. Robbie Burns Lees is my last name. When he was born in 1958, our great-grandmother gave him a small tartan book of Burns poems for his first Christmas. The cover's worn and the pages are frayed, but it was meant to be handled. We also have my grandfather's Burns book. It sat beside his chair for years, marked, noted, and returned to often. When his eyesight went, he'd still reach for it and feel the cover and know it was there. Burns wasn't something he admired from a distance. Burns was familiar. Burns was company. And that to me is the immortal memory. Not a statue, not a lesson, but words that are still being picked up, argued with, laughed at, and used more than 2 centuries later. The rank is but the guinea stamp, the man, the gal for all that. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise if you're able and charge your glasses. To Robert Burns and to the immortal memory. So,